Shalom, my friends, and welcome to Weekly Parsha with Yehuda Yisrael. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Re'eh, and let's get right into it. One thing to note is that this Parsha will deal with Deuteronomy chapter 13, which is one of my favorite chapters in the Torah because it deals with false prophets. So, any of you Jesus believers, stay tuned. But for us who just want to learn the Torah for the sake of learning the Torah, let's get right into it. Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, that you will heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today. And the curse, if you will not heed the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn away from the way that I command you this day to follow other gods, which you did not know, aka Jesus or any other God that was not revealed to the Jews, to Israel in the Torah. And it will be when the Lord your God will bring you to the land to which you will come to possess it, and you shall place those blessing upon Mount Gerizim and those cursing upon Mount Ebal. So that's when later in the book of Deuteronomy, in Parshat Kitavo, when they have the blessings and the curses, we'll get there later. Are they not on the side of the Jordan, way beyond in the direction of the sunset, in the land of the Canaanites who dwell in the plain opposite Gilgal, near the plains of Moreh? For you are crossing the Jordan to come to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall possess it and dwell in it. And you shall keep and perform all the statutes and ordinances that I am setting before you today. And here we are in Deuteronomy 12. These are the statutes and ordinances that you shall keep to perform in the land which the Lord your God of your fathers gives you to possess all the days that you live on the earth. You shall utterly destroy from all the places where the nations that you shall possess worship their gods, upon the lofty mountains and upon the hills and under every lush tree. And you shall tear down their altars, smash their monuments, burn their asherim with fire, and cut down the graven images of their gods, and destroy their name from that place. You shall not do so to the Lord your God, but only to the place which the Lord your God shall choose from all your tribes to set his name there. You shall inquire after his dwelling and come there. Keep that in mind, the place that God chooses. And there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes and your separation by your hand and your vows and your donations and the firstborn of your cattle and your sheep. Right? So the dwelling, this is the Mishkan in Shiloh. At that point, that was when, the Mishkan was the place where God chose. So it's talking about when they go into the land. So initially that was in Shiloh. Eventually it became Jerusalem, where the temple was built. That was where God chose, and that's why we do sacrifices there, right? And you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice in all your endeavors, you and all your households, as the Lord your God has blessed you. You shall not do as all the things that we do here this day, every man doing what he deems fit. So you can't just do whatever you want at any time. For you have not yet come to the resting place or to the inheritance which the Lord your God is giving you. And you shall cross the Jordan and settle the land in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and he will give you rest from your enemies surrounding you, and you will dwell securely. So I wanted to go back to this verse here where it talks about the burnt offerings and sacrifices in context with the land that God, the place that God chooses, right? Only in the place where God chooses do you do these sacrifices. That's why we don't do sacrifices today. Okay, a lot of Christians will ask, well, why don't you do sacrifices? Well, we already went through Leviticus 26 as to how God wants us to deal with sin during the exile. It does not include doing sacrifices. But it also forbids us from sacrificing outside of the place that God chooses. So that's why we don't do sacrifices in America or in Europe or, places where God didn't choose. So there's your answer. We don't do sacrifices in exile. So, and it shall be that the place that the Lord your God will choose, once again, in which to establish his name, there you shall bring all that I am commanding you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and separation by your hand, and the choice of the vows which you will vow to the Lord. It's only where God chooses. So that's why we don't do sacrifices, Christians. It says it in the Torah that we're not supposed to do it, except in the place where God chooses. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Right? Oh, here. Yeah. And it says it explicitly in the commentary here, right? You will build yourselves a temple in Jerusalem, right? That's where God chose, as scripture states concerning David. And it was when the king sat in his house and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies surrounding him that the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in the house of cedars, but the ark of God dwells within the curtain. So this is regarding the temporary Mishkan, and then obviously we know that the temple was built, and that is the place where God chose, Jerusalem, Zion, Jerusalem, as we know, as the Tanakh describes. In case you were wondering where Zionism comes from, it comes from Jerusalem, Zion. Read Psalm 137, read Zechariah chapter 8 verse 3, read Isaiah chapter 2 verse 3. Jerusalem is virtually synonymous with Zion in the Tanakh. So Zionism is simply a component of Judaism. That's where God chooses. That's why we understand the third temple. When the true Messiah comes at the end of days, Bimheira B'yameinu, we will rebuild the temple, and then we will resume the sacrifices, as it says in Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, among other places. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, and your sons and your daughters and your maidservants and your men servants and maidservants, and the Levite who is within your cities, for he has no portion of or inheritance with you. Beware lest you offer your burnt offerings at any place you see. Right? This is an explicit command not to make burnt offerings in a place where God didn't choose. We know God chose Jerusalem, so we don't make sacrifices anywhere we want or anytime we want, but only in the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you will offer up burnt offerings, and there you shall do what I command you. Right. So, and it explains, when David purchased the threshing floor and where the temple eventually stood and will stand in the future Messianic era. However, in every desire of your soul you may slaughter and eat meat in all your cities according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he gave you. The unclean and the clean may eat thereof, as of the deer and as of the gazelle. So you can still eat meat, you just don't use them for sacrifices. So, right. Great. However, you shall not eat the blood, you shall spill it on the ground like water. So there's that prohibition against eating blood again, right? That's, Leviticus 17:11, as people like to take out of context. But yeah, obviously it's a prohibition against eating blood, and blood sacrifices are not the only way to atone for sin, as explicitly mentioned in Leviticus chapter 26, verses 38 through 46, roughly. So, no Jesus blood required for atonement, forgiveness, or salvation. You may not eat within your cities the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, or the firstborn of your cattle, or of your sheep, or any of your vows that you will vow, or donations by the separation of your hand. But you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place the Lord your God will choose. Once again, will choose you, your son, your daughter, and maidservant, and your manservant, maidservant, and the Levite who is in your cities, and you shall rejoice before the Lord in all your endeavors. Beware lest you forsake the Levite all your days upon your land, when the Lord your God expands your boundary, as he has spoken to you, and you say, I will eat meat, because your soul desires meat. You may eat meat according to every desire of your soul. If the place your God chooses to put his name there will be distant from you, you may slaughter of your cattle and of your sheep, which the Lord has given you, as I have commanded you. Right? Do it in the way that as I have commanded you, right? and you may eat in your cities according to every desire of your soul. So this is, a lot of people use this as a evidence of the oral Torah, because it says, we learn from here there is a commandment regarding slaughtering, how one must slaughter. Since the commandment is not written down in the Torah, we deduce that. These are the laws of ritual slaughtering given orally to Moses on Mount Sinai, right? So how do you slaughter, a cow? How do you slaughter a chicken? How do you eat meat in a way that is, as I have commanded you? So the implication is that there was a way specifically that was more detailed than what the Torah gives. And that's why you have, I have ancestors who were, a shochet. I have an ancestor who was a shochet, probably many, but that was a very common profession. I mean, it still is a profession within you know, the Jewish community, but it was more commonly, a profession amongst religious Jews in, like the 1800s or, beyond that. But yeah, that's based on this command here, as I have given you. How do you know how to properly slaughter meat if it doesn't explicitly say how to do it? So there has to be some sort of oral component to describe that in the tradition that we have today, the oral Torah. But as the deer and the gazelle are eaten, you may eat them. The unclean and the clean alike may eat of them. However, be strong not to eat the blood, for the blood is the soul, and you shall not eat the soul with the flesh. Now that's interesting, because it doesn't make that point, that point that people always like to focus on, like, oh, it's all about the atonement and whatever. It just says the blood is the soul. It doesn't mention anything about the atonement here, because that's not the explicit purpose of that's not the sole purpose of what Leviticus 17:11 was saying. It's saying it's like the soul of the animal. So you don't eat the blood. It's not saying that this is the only way to atone for sin, and if you no other way you can do this, right? I did a whole debate on that. We know better. If you want more information on that, you can see my other videos where I talk about, you know, how there's other means of reconciliation of sin aside from just blood. You shall not eat it. You shall spill it on the ground like water. You shall not eat it in order that it be good for you and for your children after you when you do what is proper in the eyes of the Lord. However, your holy offerings, which you will have, and your vows you shall carry and come to the place that the Lord chooses. And you shall make your burnt offerings, the flesh of the blood upon the altar of the Lord your God, and the blood of your sacrifices shall be poured upon the altar of the Lord your God, and you shall eat the Lord your God, and you shall eat the flesh. It's in the place where God chooses, right? Keep and hearken to all these words that I command you, that it may benefit you and your children after you forever, when you do what is good and proper in the eyes of the Lord your God. So once again, not just in one-time deal. So this is interesting. It says, this term, shamor, I'm going to mute this. I keep getting emails. refers to the study of the oral law. Since it's not written down, you must guard it in your innards so that it not be forgotten. So, okay, great. So, chapter 12, finishing this up. When the Lord your God cuts off the nations to which you will come to drive them out from before you, and when you drive them out and dwell in the land, lest you beware and be attracted after them, after they are exterminated from before you, unless you inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? And I will do likewise. So this is an infamous verse. You shall not do so to the Lord your God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates, they did to their gods. Also, their sons and daughters and their daughters they would burn in the fire to their gods. So this is often used as, by counter missionaries to say God detests human sacrifice. The reason you don't see me using this one a lot is that there is a precedent, as we've seen before, for the death of the righteous atoning for sin. Obviously, that's not the same thing as human sacrifice, but I don't want to give the Christian room to bring up rabbinic commentaries that say, the idea that the death of the righteous can atone for sin, and that we're like contradicting it. So I usually don't use this as a point, simply because of the fact that I lean into the idea that, if we're going to say Isaiah 53 is about Israel, we have to recognize that the death of the righteous atones for sin, right? Isaiah's death atoned for sin. Jeremiah's death atoned for sin. Ezekiel's death atoned for sin. All of the righteous prophets. It's not just about the Messiah, as we know. We can prove it using the Targum. We can prove it using, sources, even a Christian source from Origen, right? Which predated Rashi by almost 1,000 years. So we have enough ammunition. Like, you want to be smart about your arguments, and you don't want to give them an opportunity to say, well, you're contradicting rabbis. So if you're confused on this channel why I don't bring up, well, God detests human sacrifice, yeah, of course he does, but I also don't want them to conflate the idea with the death of the righteous atones for sin, so I usually don't use this as a point. You can agree or disagree, but that's the way I use it. Everything I command, so this is what I do use, though. Everything I command you, that you shall be careful to do it. You shall neither add to it nor subtract from it. Of course, this is a little bit, I've heard people use this on both sides. Christians will argue, rabbis add stuff. And then, of course, we argue, well, you don't follow any of the Torah half the time. Like, the majority of Christians don't, even Jewish Christians don't follow the Torah, don't even try to, because they claim that Jesus freed them from doing it. So that's the issue, is that they have a subtraction of it. But you can make it, if you can make an argument for an oral Torah implicitly, and when we get to Parshat Shoftim, we will be able to do that in the near future. It's not about adding to the Torah when you have rabbinic interpretations. It's already implicitly understood that you follow the judge and the Levite in that generation. So that would be applicable today on some level, right? So that's where we get the idea of rabbinic tradition implicitly from the Torah. So, but here's the part that I've used this many times, if you're familiar with this channel, against believers in Jesus. So it says, if there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of a dream, and he gives you a sign or wonder. Let's say he says, I'm going to be killed on a cross, and then I'm going to resurrect on the third day after that. And then he says, and the sign or wonder he spoke to you happens. Let's say it actually does happen, and hypothetically, he's killed, this supposed prophet, and then he raises from the dead on the third day. But then he says, let us go after other gods who you have not known, and let us worship them. So let's say he says, every time there's an anonymous angel in the Tanakh, that was actually me. I was a pre-incarnate angel. You just didn't know it was him. Well, Israel didn't know. They didn't know that, right? So that's another God who Israel did not know. So that would mean, if you're going to argue that, Christians, Jesus would be another God who Israel did not know, according to Deuteronomy 13. So what does it say you do with that supposed prophet? You shall not heed the words of that prophet or that dreamer of a dream. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. So that would be a test. Jesus would be ultimately a test for the nation of Israel to see, who cares? Like, it doesn't say, if somebody resurrects himself, you just ignore everything here, and then you just say, well, he's a God-man in the flesh and 100% man, 100% God. No. The test is to see whether or not we're going to follow based on some sort of miraculous event, right? It doesn't give immunity to resurrections. It says that, it doesn't say, if a man resurrects himself, just follow everything he says and ignore what the Torah says. Ignore Deuteronomy 4, where it says, don't worship me in any form. You saw no Tumuna, you saw no form at Horeb. Forget about that. Really, the angel of the Lord was a God-man, Jesus, pre-incarnate man, and you have to worship that, or else you're going to go to hell. The opposite is true. God was testing us, according to Deuteronomy 13, to see if we would follow some false prophet who claims that he can do miracles. And even if that miracle comes true and he resurrects himself, according to Deuteronomy 13, you would have to prove that Jesus was worshipped in the Hebrew Bible. And you can't do that. You can't paint the target around the arrow and say, well, every anonymous angel was really a Jesus angel. That's not proof that people worship Jesus. It's just not. It's circular reasoning. It's painting the target around the arrow and saying bullseye. It's not oppressive. I could say every time the anonymous angel appears, it was, I could make up anybody I wanted. I could say it was Shabtai Tzvi. I could say it was Rabbi Akiva. I could say, like, I could make up whatever I wanted. Say, really, really, it was always Bar Kochba. He was the angel of the Lord. There's no proof. Resurrection or not, it doesn't say that resurrections absolve you of having to follow the Torah. Because that means everything they say, it's nonsense. Anyway, you shall follow the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and heed his voice. Worship him and cleave to him. And that prophet or dreamer of a dream shall be put to death because he spoke falsehood about the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, who redeemed you from the house of bondage, to lead you astray from the way of the Lord your God and commanded the way of the Lord your God commanded you to go, so that you shall clear away the evil from your midst. So Jesus being killed would be just appropriate based on the fact that he was teaching falsehood and teaching another God who he claims is him, according to most Christians, right? So he would be deserving of death, according to Deuteronomy 13. But what I find interesting is it uses that the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So Christians will often argue, well, Jesus is the same God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Well, guess what Jeroboam said in the book of Kings? He said his first decree basically to the people of Israel was, he said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And he's referring to golden calves in Bethel and Dan. Anybody can attribute, the actions of God to some foreign god. That doesn't make that that doesn't make that person or idol God, according the actual Hashem, right? Anybody can do this. So why are you so compelled? Oh, Jesus was always the God. It's not in the Tanakh. It's just not. I could say it was a golden calf every time the anonymous angel came up. It was really the golden calf. You just didn't know it. You didn't know. Like, Christians, like, just think about it for a second. Like, you could literally put anybody in that space of the angel of the Lord if you're going to argue this silly argument. And once again, we did a whole video on Deuteronomy 4 and debunking the idea that, God would come in the form of a man. That would violate Deuteronomy 4, right? And we went through the, how Moses would be the only person. You can watch other videos for that. But if your brother, the son of your mother, tempts you in secret, or your son or your daughter, or the wife of your embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul, saying, let us go and worship other gods, which neither you nor your forefathers have known, aka Jesus, and any other god, of the gods of the people around you, whether near or far from you, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, you shall not desire him, you shall not hearken to him, neither shall you pity him, have mercy on him, nor shield him, but you shall surely kill him, and your hand shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. So we don't do this, and we don't have the Sanhedrin to even do this, so you don't have to worry about this, but just know the severity of the sin. Same thing with breaking Shabbat and such. None of this is practically enforced because we don't have a Sanhedrin, because we are in exile. And you shall stone him with the stones so that he dies, because he sought to lead you astray from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And Israel shall listen in fear, and they shall no longer do any evil such as this in your midst. And if you hear in one of your cities, which the Lord your God is giving you to dwell therein, saying, unfaithful men have gone forth from among you and have led the inhabitants of their city astray, let us go and worship other gods which you have not known, aka Jesus or any other god, then you shall inquire, investigate, and ask thoroughly, and behold, it is true, this matter is certain, that the abomination has been committed in your midst. Then you shall surely strike down the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroy it. with all that is in it, and its livestock, and with the edge of the sword. And you shall collect all its spoil into the midst of its open square, and burn with fire the city and all its spoil completely for the Lord your God. And it shall be a heap of destruction forever, never to be rebuilt, and nothing that is doomed to destruction shall cling to your hand, so that the Lord may return and be compassionate with you and multiply you as he swore to your forefathers. For you shall hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, to keep all his commandments which I command you this day, to keep or to do which is proper in the eyes of the Lord your God. For the children of the Lord your God, you shall neither cut yourselves nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead, right? For you are holy. So these are like things that I guess pagan nations used to do, so you don't do as they do. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a treasured people for him out of all the nations that are upon the earth. You shall not eat any abomination. What does that mean? These are the animals that you may eat. So it's reiterating this: the ox, the lamb, and the kid, gazelle, deer, antelope, ibex, chaimois, okay, and bison and giraffe, okay, and every animal that has a split hoof and has a hoof cloven into its hoof sections, and choose its cut among the animals that you may eat. But you shall not eat those that chew the cud, or those that have split hooves, the cloven one, the camel, and the hyrax, and the hare, for they chew the cud, but they do not have split hooves. They are unclean for you. So no camels. And the pig, because it has a split hoof, but does not chew its cud, is unclean for you. Therefore you shall neither eat of their flesh or touch their carcasses, right? So pig is obviously the most infamous, but hey, camels aren't kosher either. Or the hyrax or the hare. They got to have both signs, split hoof and chew their cud, right? Oh, right. That was interesting. I remember the whole giraffe argument, because the giraffe technically has a split hoof and chews its cud, but I think I told this infamous story of when I was in kindergarten and the rabbi asked, "How do you know if a giraffe is kosher?" And I said it has an OU on it. So, cute little misconception. Right. So these you may eat of all that are in the waters, all that have fins and scales you may eat, but whatever does not have fins and scales you shall not eat, for it is unclean for you. You may eat every clean bird, but these are those from which you shall not eat: the eagle, the giraffe, vulture, and the ostrich, or the osprey. Is that supposed to say ostrich? I know you can't eat ostriches. And the white vulture, and the black vulture, and the kite after its species. Some people say birds of prey. It's a little more ambiguous with the birds. And every raven after its species. And okay, there it is. The ostrich and the owl and the gull and the hawk after its species. The falcon and the ibis and the bat. Yeah, can't eat those. So you can't blame the Jews for COVID-19. And the pelican and the magpie and the cormorant, I don't know what that is, and the stork and the heron and its species, and all the hoopoe and the atalef, and every flying insect is unclean for you. They may not be eaten. You may eat any clean fowl. You shall not eat any carcass. You may give it to the stranger who is in your cities, and he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Of course, this is the prohibition. I like to say, don't mix life and death, right? Milk gives, life, and a dead kid, I guess, is representing dead. So we can get into that in a different, that's a big topic. So you shall tithe the seed of the crop that the field gives forth year by year, and you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place he chooses. There you go again, to establish his name therein, and the tithes of your grain, your wine, and your oil, and the firstborn of your cattle and your sheep, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God all the days. And if the way be too long for you, that you are unable to carry it, for the place of which the Lord your God will choose to establish his name therein is too far from you, the Lord your God will bless you. And you shall turn it into money, and bind up the money in your hand, and you shall go to the place the Lord your God will choose, and you shall turn that money into whatever your soul desires, cattle, sheep, new wine, old wine, whatever your soul desires, and you shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. And as for you, the Levite who is in your cities, you shall not forsake him, for he has neither portion nor inheritance for you. At the end of 3 years, you shall take out all the tithe of your crop in that year and place it in your cities. And the Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are in your cities, will come and eat and be satisfied, so that the Lord your God will bless you in all the work of your hand that you will do. All right. At the end of 7 years, you will make a release. I guess this is the... Okay, interesting. And, the Shemitah, okay. And this is the matter of the release, to release the hand of every creditor from him what he lent his friend. He shall not exact from his friend or his brother, because time of the release for the Lord has arrived. The foreigner you may exact, but what is yours with your brother your hand shall release. However, there will be no needy among you, for the Lord will surely bless you in the land the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess. However, if you hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, to be careful to do all this commandment which I am commanding you today, for the Lord your God has blessed you, he spoke to you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow, and you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. And there will be among you, if there be among you, a needy person from one of your brothers in one of your cities in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not harden your heart, nor shall you close your hand from your needy brother. Rather, you shall open your hand to him, and you shall lend him sufficient for his needs, which he is lacking. Beware lest there be in your heart any unfaithful thought, saying, the 7th year, the year of release, has approached, and you will begrudge your needy brother and not give it to him. And he will cry out to the Lord against you, and it will be a sin for you. You shall surely give him, and your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him. Be happy about it, right? For because of this thing, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and all your endeavors. For there will never cease to be needy in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall surely open your hand to your brother, to your poor one and your needy one in your land. If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve for you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall send him forth free from you. And when you send him forth free from you, you shall not send him forth empty-handed. You shall surely provide him from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your vat, and you shall give him what the Lord your God has blessed you. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I am commanding you this thing today. And it will be, if he says to you, I will not leave you. So if he wants to stay despite this, because he loves you and your household, and is good for him with you, then you shall take an awl and put it through his ear into the door, and he will be a servant to you forever. Right? Interesting ritual. And also your maidservant you shall do likewise. And you shall not be troubled when you set him free from you, for twice as much as a hired servant he has served you 6 years, and the Lord your God will bless you in all that you shall do. Quite an interesting situation. We don't really do this today, so and it's interesting. Yeah. Every firstborn male that is born of your cattle or of your flock you shall sanctify to the Lord. You shall neither work with the firstborn of your ox, nor shear the firstborn of your flock. You shall eat it before the Lord your God year by year in the place the Lord your the Lord chooses for you in your household. And if there be any blemish in it, whether it be lame or blind or any ill blemish, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God. You shall eat it within your cities, the unclean and the clean together, as a deer and as the gazelle. However, you shall not eat the blood. No, you shall pour it on the ground as water. All right. Deuteronomy 16. Keep the month of spring and make the Passover offering to the Lord your God in the month of spring. I guess it says Aviv here. We call it Nisan today. And the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt at night. And you shall slaughter the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God, the flock and the festivals of sacrifices, the cattle, and the place which the Lord will choose, once again, in Jerusalem to establish his name therein, right? So that's why we do not do that. So you shall not eat leaven with it for 7 days. You shall eat it with matzah, the bread of affliction. For in haste you went out of the land of Egypt, so that you shall remember the day when you went out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. And no leaven shall be seen with you within all your border for 7 days, neither shall any of the flesh you slaughter on the preceding day in the afternoon remain all night until the morning. Well, that's an interesting part. Yeah, the leaven part is more relevant, I guess, that we deal with, but the slaughter we don't really do today. So, because once again, we don't have a temple, so we're not allowed to sacrifice outside of where God chooses. You shall not sacrifice the Passover offering within any of your cities, which the Lord your God is giving you. Right? Exactly. It's emphasizing it again, except at the place the Lord your God will choose. That's why we don't do Passover sacrifices today. Right? In his name you shall slaughter the Passover offering in the afternoon as the sun sets at the appointed time that you went out of Egypt. Interesting. You shall roast it and eat it in the place which the Lord your God will choose, and you shall turn away in the morning and go to your dwellings. For 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the 7th day there shall be a halt to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work on it. How do you define work? Of course, you need an oral Torah to understand what that means. You shall count down 7 weeks for yourself, right? Shiva Shavuot. From the time the sickle is first put to the standing crop, and you shall begin to count 7 weeks. And you shall perform Chag Shavuot. I knew it. I one of my relatives was claiming that there is, it's never referred to as Shavuot in the Torah. Nope. Here it is. Yes, it is referred to, the Bikurim, the first fruits, but no, it's referred to as Shavuot. Chag Shavuot. The festival of weeks to the Lord your God. The donation you can afford to give, according to how the Lord your God shall bless you. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter and your maidservant and your manservant, maidservant, and the Levite who is in your cities, and the stranger and the orphan and the widow who are among you, in the place which the Lord your God will choose. That's why we don't, once again, so this is for Shavuot, and that's why we don't do the sacrifices, because we don't have a temple. We will when the future Messiah comes. Bimhei Yemenu. And when you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall keep and perform these statutes, right? So you do the counting of the Omer, and then you do Shavuot. I think they call it Pentecost in Christian circles. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but that's kind of what it is. So you shall make yourselves the festival of Sukkot for 7 days, when you gather in all the produce from your threshing floor and your vat, and you shall rejoice in festival, you and your son and your daughter, your manservant, there you go, and your maidservant and your Levite and your stranger and the orphan and the widow, who are all within your cities. 7 days you shall celebrate the festival to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord, once again, shall choose, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and all the work of your hands, and you will only be happy. 3 times, this is what we refer to as the Shalosh Regalim, right? 3 times a year, one of your males shall appear before the Lord your God, every one of your males, in the place he will choose, right? The festival of Matzah, the festival of weeks, there it is, Chag Shavuot, and the festival of Sukkot. So Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And he shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall bring as much as he can afford according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. Beautiful. So there we go. Finishing up with the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 temple festivals. I guess you can include Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, kind of in the Sukkot bundle, because you got to go up for that. But yeah, I hope this video has been a blessing to you all. And, as always, Shalom Aleichem.